Today I got with me 2 bags. These 2 bags I have been carrying with me my entire life. Not physically, of course, but mentally, emotionally, quietly. This first bag was packed for me very early on in my life by my parents, with a lot of love and best wishes. Yeah? This bag has always been there with me in my life, and I've been carrying it around. This bag was holding the one law which I was taught when I was growing up. Work hard. Be a good person. Stay honest. That was like the law of the land, an unspoken law but understood very well in our families. Put in the effort, keep your head down, and someone somewhere will notice you and reward you. Just keep doing the work and putting in the effort, and don't worry about anything else. Raise your hands in the audience. Anybody who, like me, has also grown up with this kind of advice from your parents at home? Yes? Wow, wow. I see a lot of people in the boat with me, yeah? And I truly, truly believed that if I kept putting in all of the effort and the hard work, one day I will be seen, it will be rewarded. I lived by bag 1, day in, day out, every single day. But there was also this bag 2. Now, this bag 2 was given to me, but nobody ever told me what to put in this bag or even what this bag 2 was about. And so this bag number 2 just kind of lay there. It stayed empty. But somewhere along the line, the world started to change. Not in its values, but in its volume, sheer volume. And I started to notice that it was always not the people doing the good work who were actually getting recognized. Noise started to travel, much, much faster than sometimes merit. Yeah? Doing good and being good somehow wasn't good enough anymore. Sad but true. And that is when I started to realize something, that both of these 2 bags matter. At first, I didn't notice it, but slowly over a period of time, as I lived my life, life started showing me in small, small stories, some of them big wins, some of them losses, some in between. And that was when I realized that both of these 2 bags matter. And the bag 1 was simply all of my effort and the good advice that I had been given, effort and all of the goodness of doing good work. That was bag 1. Bag 1, in other words, was who I was. Bag 2 was how the world understood who I was. And that difference is where my story really begins. So I was a few years into my corporate career, not like a fresher, but still junior enough when it came to really senior rooms. Now, one day, our global CEO, I was working in a large multinational corporation at that time, and a global CEO from UK traveled down to India. Now, I know a lot of youngish crowd over here, but think like more than 20 years back, early 2000s, okay? So the global CEO from UK comes down, and there's this big meeting amongst all his important meetings outside with top clients and all. And we're all huddled up in the office in this large room to kind of have this impromptu conversation with him. And, it's the kind of meeting where you're supposed to look proper, yeah? And nod your head, yes, sir, and keep smiling and have your best faces on, And the global CEO was speaking very passionately about the upcoming Asia meet. Very proudly, he was telling everybody, we're all going to have our Asia meet where all of the regions are going to come together and celebrate and whatnot. And Everybody was nodding and smiling along. And I remember thinking in my head, wait, why is everybody nodding? We haven't been invited. So I did something which was not bold, not strategic, not planned. Some might even call it foolish. I just raised my hand. But sir, we haven't even been invited. Silence, the kind of pin drop silence I used to get, when I was like, when the nuns told me when I was growing up in my convent school, Geetika, shh, keep quiet, silence. That kind of silence, it was like hush, like right now in this room. And then everybody looked at the global CEO. First he was surprised, then he was alarmed, then he was positively irritated. How could an entire region not be on the guest list? So in the next 48 hours, you can imagine what happened internally in that organization. Fast forward a few days, the trip got over. He was about to go back to the headquarters in London, and he said, my God, I've had such an amazing trip. You guys are doing such great work. I want somebody from the India team to come and represent in our headquarters so we know what good work you are doing. So obviously the India MD gave a couple of senior names. And the global CEO looked at him and he said, yeah, but why not Geetika? That's how he called me, Geetika. Yeah? And everybody was quiet again. And in a few days, once all the formalities were done, Geetika in the early 2000s was flown off in style from being some junior or mid-level person to the UK headquarters to represent the entire India region amongst all the board members for a whole week. I called it luck, don't we all? But it wasn't really luck. I got to know that much, much later on. When I raised my hand, I had actually told and sent a signal about who I actually was. Yeah, I had actually just in that very single one moment positioned myself. I had started to carve out and create an identity for my own self by just simply raising my hand. Sometimes when we just speak the truth as it is, without any theatrics and dramatics, that is all it takes to start creating who you are. The entire office at that time, my little tiny world, or my entire career in that tiny little office space, everybody at that moment got to know who I am and what I stand for. I was somebody who stood for speaking her mind. I was somebody who was even ready to speak what other people were thinking. I was somebody who always stands for equality, for inclusion. I was somebody who was not afraid to speak up. And that started to carve out my identity, because suddenly in a room full of more than 100 people, just like this room, boom, I stood out. Not because I was being loud, but just because my identity was clear enough to travel a few feet. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the first brick of my second bag, positioning. Positioning is not about being loud and being heard. It's just about having an identity that is clear enough to travel ahead of you. I, of course, went to London for that 1 week. It was one of the most amazing weeks of my life at that point of time. I entered into meetings which I would not even have known about. I met people, I developed relationships. Soon after a few months, I got promoted. I moved permanently to London, and I got promoted as the Global Business Development Director of that entire conglomerate across the globe, the youngest ever in the 140-year history of that company. Now, after a few years of working, yeah, another thing happened in the organization, and the organization started to restructure like many do. And another position came up, which was the India Sales Director position, and two names were thrown up. One was a colleague doing great work within India itself, and one was another girl doing great work in the UK, yours truly. Now, I obviously thought, I'm not going to get it. I'm so far away from the action, the India market. Why would they give me the role? I didn't create any propaganda. I didn't pitch to anyone. I just kept quiet. I thought I'll never get it. And then a call came. The call. I remember looking at that phone screen. I think it used to be Blackberries in those days. And I looked at that phone screen and I wondered to myself, did I get lucky again? And of course, much later on in life, I realized that no, it still hadn't been luck. This time, it had been something which was carrying my work ahead of me, through to other people, without me even having to say it. And that was the credibility that I had built over the years. Not through any big propaganda, but through consistently small doses of hard work which we put in, right? And that consistency became my track record, and I built that credibility over a period of time. And that's when I realized that credibility is not something that you say about yourself. Credibility is about what your behavior over a period of time teaches others to say about you. And that was the second brick, which went into bag number 2. So first was positioning, the second was credibility that I learned that goes into this empty bag. Of course, it was much later on that I realized all of this so-called wisdom. At that point of time, I came back to India. I had a great few years, and then I left it all. I left the corporate world, not because I was fed up of it or not excited by it, but just because I wanted to do something even bigger, something even more exciting. And I said, oh, I'm going to become an entrepreneur. I'm going to start my own baby, right? And I left it all behind me. I started this luxury tech fashion portal, something completely different from the technology world that I was belonging to earlier. And I gave it my everything, my blood, my sweat, my toil, all of the learnings of the last whatever number of years. And every penny, every moment that I had saved over the years, all of my learnings were put into that venture, and it did not work. Day by day, week by week, month by month, and actually even year by year, I saw the pennies fall off my bank account, even all of those great British pounds that I'd saved. And I reached a point where we just couldn't sustain. Costs had spiraled, and even though sales were happening, scaling itself became very tough, and I took, I believe, one of the toughest decisions of my life to shut my baby down. It was frightening. But it wasn't really just the financial loss of losing my entire life savings and suddenly going from hero to zero and feeling penniless in the middle of your life. It actually shattered my worldview. Because you see, I had been ingrained with the thought that work hard, be honest, stay good, and it will all work out. But then I realized, and it hit me, that in this new world, being good and doing everything right is sometimes still not enough. I started to ask myself, oops, did I get unlucky this time? Yeah. Later on, much later on, I realized that no, it's not that I suddenly became unlucky. It is just that when I was stripped of all of the corporate labels, the branding, the teams, all of that thing, and when it was stripped down, I didn't actually rise to the occasion. I hid behind and tried to create a product, a platform which was wow, but I wasn't putting myself out there. Nobody knew me suddenly. I had actually become invisible to the world. And that's the third lesson that I learned, that if you're not in front of the world, if you're hiding behind thinking you're doing good work and the world will wake up one day and notice you, it no longer happens in this very loud world that we have entered now. And that was the third brick which went in through my life loss, so to speak, which was the brick of visibility. or invisibility, in my case, in the story. When I lost everything, a lot of people expected me to just go back to the corporate sector or start another venture because, when you're an entrepreneur, you wake up every day and you have a new idea, right? But I was so shattered from within that my entire self-confidence had just kind of plummeted, and I realized that there is no way that I can work any harder. I can't suddenly become any smarter. So why would anything that I do now in repeat mode work? Right? So I had gone into that tunnel of self-doubt. And I said, for once in my life, I will do something which I have never done before, which is nothing. I was somebody whose entire life was based on action. I was told, do, Peter, don't think, act. And I had been acting and taking action my whole life on my dreams. And suddenly there is this woman who wakes up at the age of 40 every day and says, okay, what to do now? Right? It was super frightening. But then I met somebody in that journey, and that somebody was silence. And when I sat with that somebody, that silence, suddenly all of that self-doubt and all of those noises started to melt away. The self-pressures that we create, nobody was telling me to keep going on in my life, do this, do that. We all just create those own self-pressures, those own targets, those own big thoughts, and outcomes that we will reach. They all started to melt away, and another thing emerged. My own voice. For the first time, I started to hear my own voice, and I started to write. When I published my first book, Finding Your G-Spot, it was not a marketing strategy, it was not a branding strategy, it was not a Geetika comes back strategy. It was just me being true and me sharing my story and my learnings with people. And that book traveled. It traveled to readers' hearts, it traveled to people, and people from different places started messaging me on Instagram and everywhere, right? That, hey, I feel seen. I was like, wow, I didn't know that, by just writing a book, I could create that kind of impact. But I realized that this is something that we all kind of go through, and my journey was no exception to anybody else's. I had lived an ordinary life, right? When my story started to reach people, I asked myself, what is so special about my story? And I realized something. There is exactly nothing special about my story. It was just that it was true. It was authenticity. Because when what you feel is what you say, is what you show, is what you do, and it all matches, that is authenticity, and that is what people believe. People believed the words I'd written in the book, and they realized that this is who she is, right? And that was the fourth brick that I put into my second bag, which was story. Yeah? Story is not something you say to impress somebody. Hey, this is my story, I did this. No, story is not something you say to impress somebody. Story is what helps people connect with you. And with that fourth brick, I started off. I knew now that all I needed to do was be authentic and stay me and do what I wanted to do, which was write and speak. It actually, my first book got me the invite to my first TEDx talk, and I got to stand here on the red dot many years back because somebody had read my book and said that they want me to come and speak on the art of reviving reading in our generation, right? 7 years ahead, and for the 7th time now, I'm standing on this red dot. So grateful for the process, definitely. I realized that when we have all of these 4 bricks in this bag, your truth becomes undeniable. Bag 1 as it is in today's very cluttered, very troubled, I would say very noisy world, is not enough on its own. Bag one is super, super important. But without bag two, bag one doesn't travel, it just stays with you, right? And I realized that I needed a fifth brick rather, in this bag number two, which was how to give something to the people that now believe you, trust you, yeah, how to give them a way to continue with you, to continue on this journey with you. And I call that fifth brick continuity or conversion. So I took all of my learnings and I started teaching people, mentoring people rather, on how to write a book. And that's how Bija House, India's first and only mentored platform for aspiring authors, it came up. It wasn't really a business plan. For the first time, I started something without a business plan, but it was just an extension of my story. And that fifth brick, that I needed a way to keep connected to everybody else so that I could keep this journey of my own story alive. With these 5 bricks now, I understand that how important bag two for all of us in today's world is. These 5 pillars of trust, which I call the architecture of trust in today's times, is what helps to carry bag one forward in the world. Right? Your positioning, your identity, so important. When I raised up my hand, that little tiny gesture, I was just positioning myself and creating my identity. When in the second instance, when I got my role without promoting myself, that was because my track record, my credibility was helping me. When I did not come up and stand in front of the world, but shied and hid away while building and trying to promote my venture, that was lack of visibility, because that also is needed. That was the third brick. The fourth pillar was the story, my story. Your story, we all have a story. And the fifth one, of course, was the conversion or continuity, that we need a mode to stay connected with all of the people that we're trying to impact in the world. And this is the bag number 2, which becomes extremely important in our journey. If bag number 1 holds your character, then bag number 2 carries your character to the world so that they can see it, appreciate it, and use it, for that matter. That is when I realized the importance of these 2 bags. My parents had very lovingly given me bag 1, and with the raised hands earlier, I believe all of us come from that. And this is like a super, super important bag, because this bag is who I was. Very important. Without this bag, I'd be nobody. But bag 2 is equally important, because bag 2 is how the world understands who you are. And we need to build on bag 2, which I was never told how to fill, which my life, through all its ups and downs, told me how to fill this bag. And that's the thought that I want to leave with you today, that if effort, if integrity, if all that bag 1 carries is the first stepping stone, and it decides who you are in today's cluttered, noisy world, then equally important is the trust that you build. And because the trust is what will help people to see you, to understand you, to recognize you. That's what led me to believe Trustable, which is the world's first platform which can help measure the level of your trust within the world's audience, and to help you to improve it step by step, brick by brick. Because when people trust you, everything changes. You become trustable. Thank you.